There comes a moment in every connection where the heart grows tired in a way the mind cannot explain. It is not anger, not resentment, not a dramatic explosion, but a quiet shift inside you that whispers, "No more." This moment arrives after you have given everything, after you have stretched yourself to reach someone who kept stepping back each time you moved closer. You don't announce this shift. You don't scream it or demand recognition. You simply stop chasing, and that single decision, made in silence, begins to change everything. The avoidant who once felt so comfortable keeping you at a safe distance suddenly feels a strange emptiness in the spaces where your warmth used to live. They don't understand it at first because they believed your presence would be permanent, a steady pulse they could always rely on without having to match your beat. But when you pull your energy back, the bond that once felt predictable becomes unfamiliar. They start to notice the quiet. They start to notice the absence of your softness. They start to notice the room they created with their distance feels colder than they expected. And for you, something subtle but powerful awakens. You feel your strength returning, your intuition rising, your identity unfolding beyond the exhausting role you were playing. In the stillness, you discover that you were not losing them, you were losing yourself, and now you are finding your way back. This is the moment when everything begins to shift, not through force, but through the quiet power of no longer chasing someone who only knew how to run. When you stop chasing an avoidant, the entire structure of the relationship begins to shift from its foundation, because the dynamic was never built on mutual movement. It was built on one person pursuing connection and the other retreating from it. This pattern does not happen by accident. It is an unconscious psychological dance where one partner carries the burden of emotional initiation, reassurance, and closeness, while the other partner feels overwhelmed by the very thing they secretly long for. The avoidant relies on the pursuer to maintain the bond without ever having to fully step into vulnerability. When the empath or anxious partner stops chasing, the dynamic collapses as naturally as a bridge losing one of its pillars. This collapse is not loud or dramatic. It is subtle, internal, and deeply transformative for both individuals involved. The avoidant is no longer held up by the emotional energy of the chaser, and the chaser is no longer drained by constantly trying to pull someone closer who is wired to pull away. The avoidant's sense of safety was tied to distance, and your chasing allowed them to maintain that distance without feeling alone. They could keep you close enough to feel desired, but far enough to avoid emotional exposure. Your pursuit acted as the emotional glue that held the connection together, even if it felt unstable. Once you stop chasing, the avoidant must face the space they created. At first, this space feels like freedom to them, a release from pressure, but very quickly it reveals something far deeper. Without someone reaching for them, they have no way to measure their value or their significance in the relationship. They are left with themselves, and that is the very place they try to avoid. The avoidant does not fear you. They fear the parts of themselves that closeness threatens to expose. Your chasing protected them from this confrontation because your effort kept their emotional world safely externalized. When you retreat, the mirror disappears, and they must confront their own reflection. For the chaser, stopping is not a simple decision. It happens after exhaustion, clarity, or emotional burnout pushes them to reclaim their energy. The moment they stop chasing, they discover something surprising. Their identity begins to separate from the role they played in the dynamic. For so long, their worth was tied to the pursuit, to trying to make things work, trying to soothe, trying to prove loyalty. When they stop, they feel an unfamiliar lightness, a sense of self that was buried under emotional labor. This shift is transformative because it marks the beginning of self-reclamation. The chaser begins to see how much of their emotional energy was flowing outward rather than inward. The silence they create is not empty. It is a sanctuary where their intuition starts to rise again, where their needs stop being overshadowed by someone else's fear. The avoidant, on the other hand, experiences this silence as a disruption to the unspoken contract they believed would always hold. They were accustomed to the dynamic where closeness appeared without them having to earn it. The chaser's presence created emotional certainty. When that certainty disappears, the avoidant is forced to confront their own patterns. Their usual reactions, distancing, withdrawing, avoiding deeper conversations, are no longer responses to external pressure. They are reflections of internal wounds. Without someone pulling them closer, they must question why closeness feels threatening in the first place. The emotional distance they once valued now becomes a mirror showing them their own unmet needs, fears, and insecurities. What makes this dynamic collapse so powerful is that it is not fueled by anger, punishment, or games. It is simply the natural consequence of understanding that you cannot pull someone into intimacy with force. When the chaser stops chasing, the avoidant loses the emotional structure that kept them comfortable. The dynamic that once protected them from vulnerability dissolves, and beneath that dissolution is a sudden awareness that the connection they kept at arm's length might have been the very thing they needed but were too afraid to receive. When you stop chasing an avoidant, something profound happens that most people don't expect. Your energy, which was once stretched thin trying to hold the relationship together, begins to return to you. For the longest time, your emotional attention flowed outward towards someone who could not fully receive it. You were the one analyzing every silence, soothing every conflict, carrying the emotional weight, and trying to anticipate what they needed so the connection would not collapse. This constant outward flow creates an imbalance where your inner world becomes neglected while theirs becomes unintentionally supported. The moment you stop chasing, even quietly, that flow reverses direction. You no longer abandon yourself to maintain the bond. You start hearing your own feelings again, noticing your own exhaustion, and recognizing the moments when you silenced your needs just to keep peace. This reversal is not dramatic. It happens slowly, like a tide turning. But once it begins, you feel a sense of clarity you haven't felt in a long time. As your energy returns inward, the avoidant experiences the opposite. The vacuum left behind is not merely emotional absence, it is the disappearance of a stabilizing force they didn't realize they depended on. Avoidants often believe they want distance because closeness feels overwhelming, but what they actually want is controlled closeness. Connection without vulnerability, affection without accountability, intimacy without emotional exposure. Your chasing allowed them to maintain that illusion. You carried the emotional workload so they wouldn't have to confront their own fear of closeness. When you stop, they suddenly feel the weight of the emotional space you once filled. What once felt like pressure now feels like loss, and this shift is jarring for them because avoidants rarely expect the other person to stop reaching. They assume the bond will remain unbalanced because that is how it has always been. Your withdrawal forces them to feel their own emptiness. The silence you create removes the emotional cushion they relied on to avoid confronting their wounded inner world. The more your energy returns to you, the more they sense the absence. They begin to feel things they usually suppress: uncertainty, insecurity, longing. Avoidants often mistake emotional distance for strength, but without the presence of someone emotionally attuned, distance begins to feel like isolation. It exposes the lonely parts of themselves they haven't healed. The vacuum created by your detachment triggers a quiet panic inside them, not because they fear losing control, but because they never developed the tools to regulate connection on their own. Your presence once allowed them to feel desired without having to initiate. When that presence fades, they must confront the reality that they contributed nothing to sustain the bond. Meanwhile, as you pull your energy back toward yourself, you start reconnecting with parts of you that were pushed aside. You begin to notice desires you ignored, limits you crossed, and red flags you tolerated. The emotional fog lifts. Your self-worth begins to rise again because you are no longer tying it to someone else's inconsistent affection. You feel a sense of grounding, as if you have finally stepped out of a maze. This inward movement restores your intuition, which had been clouded by the chaos of trying to understand someone who could not understand themselves. For the first time in a long time, you feel your own presence. You recognize that your value does not depend on someone else choosing you. Your detachment becomes an act of self-respect, not rejection. The avoidant, feeling the vacuum, begins to question their assumptions. They expected your pursuit to continue indefinitely, but now they must confront the absence of the emotional certainty they took for granted. They experience a subtle shift from relief to discomfort, from calm to curiosity, from distance to awareness. They begin wondering where your warmth went, why the emotional space feels colder, and what changed inside them now that you are no longer pouring energy into the connection. This discomfort is unfamiliar to them, but it is also the beginning of their awakening. They may not express it in words, but they feel it in their behavior, their thoughts, their longing, and even in the quiet moments when your absence echoes louder than your presence ever did. Your energy returns to you, and theirs begins to stir inside them. This is the silent turning point in the dynamic, the moment when everything starts to shift, not through effort, but through the natural balance that emerges when you stop giving more than you receive. When you stop chasing an avoidant, something happens that goes far deeper than distance or silence. It forces the avoidant to confront the very thing they have spent years, sometimes a lifetime, avoiding, their own internal emptiness. As long as you are pursuing them, reassuring them, initiating closeness, and holding emotional space, they could hide behind the illusion that they were in control of the relationship. Your effort shielded them from their deepest fear, the fear of intimacy, because your pursuit allowed them to maintain emotional distance without feeling abandoned. They could retreat into themselves whenever closeness felt overwhelming, knowing you would always bridge the gap. When you stop chasing, that bridge collapses, and for the first time, they are left alone with the parts of themselves they have not learned to face. Avoidants carry emotional wounds that often come from childhood environments where closeness felt unsafe, unpredictable, or suffocating. To protect themselves, they built an inner world where independence became their armor, distance became their safety, and emotional walls became their identity. As adults, they feel drawn to connection but terrified of the vulnerability it requires. Your chasing kept them from ever having to confront that contradiction. You allowed them to maintain the illusion that they could have connection without having to risk emotional exposure. When you step back, that illusion disappears, and what remains is the emptiness that distance was designed to cover. The silence you create does not feel peaceful to them. It feels like a space they do not know how to navigate. At first, their instinct is to rationalize it. They may tell themselves they prefer the distance, that the relationship needed space, that they function better alone. But beneath these thoughts is a growing discomfort, a quiet realization that they no longer feel the emotional presence they depended on. Avoidants do not usually notice what someone gives until that giving stops. Your emotional availability once filled the empty spaces inside them, even if they never acknowledged it. When you withdraw, those empty spaces become impossible to ignore. This inner emptiness is not just a feeling, it is an identity struggle. The avoidant's sense of self is often fragile because it was built without enough emotional attunement during early development. They learn to manage their emotions by suppressing them. They learn to maintain stability by avoiding dependence. They learn to feel safe by controlling closeness. Your pursuit made it easy for them to maintain these coping patterns. They never needed to step into vulnerability because you were doing all the emotional work that intimacy requires. When you stop, their psychological defenses can no longer hide the truth. The emptiness is revealed not as a flaw, but as a wound that has never been healed. The avoidant begins to question why your absence feels heavier than your presence did. They start to wonder why the silence feels unfamiliar instead of freeing. They start to feel the weight of their own avoidance, the way they pushed away the very closeness they now miss. They are forced to confront the reality that intimacy was not the danger they believed it to be. The real danger was the inner disconnection they carried within themselves. Without your emotional warmth stabilizing the connection, the avoidant realizes they have no inner structure to support closeness on their own. They feel the fragility of their independence. They feel the hollowness behind their distance. They feel the emotional hunger they have been denying for years. For the first time, the avoidant sees the cost of their own patterns. They see how pushing you away did not protect them, it isolated them. They see how avoiding vulnerability did not keep them safe, it kept them lonely. They see how maintaining emotional distance did not give them freedom. It prevented them from experiencing real connection. This awareness does not come all at once. It rises slowly, in moments of silence, in sudden memories, in late-night thoughts, in unexpected longing. Your absence becomes the mirror that reveals their internal landscape, a landscape shaped by fear rather than truth. When you stop chasing, the avoidant cannot rely on your energy to soothe their fears. They must sit with their own emotions, their own insecurities, their own unmet needs. And in that stillness, they begin to understand something powerful. They were never afraid of you. They were afraid of the parts of themselves that closeness would expose. Your stepping back forces them to finally face those parts, not out of choice, but out of necessity. And this internal confrontation is the first real step toward growth, healing, and self-awareness for someone with avoidant tendencies. When you stop chasing an avoidant, you step out of a psychological pattern that neither of you consciously agreed to, yet both of you were participating in. This pattern is built on projection, an unconscious process where each person assigns parts of themselves onto the other. The avoidant projected their fears, insecurities, and unmet childhood needs onto you, painting you as too demanding, too emotional, or too close, even when you were simply trying to connect. At the same time, you projected your hopes, empathy, and deep longing for emotional closeness onto them, seeing potential where there was avoidance, and seeing depth where there was actually fear. This created a shadow dance where both people were relating more to their internal narratives than to each other. When you step back and stop chasing, this entire exchange is disrupted because projection cannot survive without emotional interaction to feed it. The avoidant depended on you to play the role that made their worldview feel consistent. If they believed closeness was unsafe, then your pursuit became proof of their internal script, that relationships are overwhelming, that emotional needs are suffocating, that love requires distance to remain manageable. They projected their unresolved experiences onto you, interpreting your genuine affection as pressure and your attempts to communicate as emotional threat. As long as you were chasing, this narrative stayed intact. But when you stop, the projection no longer fits the reality. They can no longer claim you are smothering them when you are no longer pursuing. They can no longer blame you for the emotional intensity in the relationship when you've taken your intensity back. Without you playing the assigned role, their entire psychological framework begins to crack. On your side, stepping out of the dynamic forces you to see the difference between who they truly are and who you hoped they could become. When you were chasing, you were often responding to the version of them you imagined, not the person standing in front of you. You saw their potential for closeness, their glimpses of vulnerability, their rare moments of tenderness, and you projected onto those moments an entire emotional capacity that they had not developed. Your pursuit was fueled by this projection. When you pull back, your vision becomes clearer. You stop idealizing their avoidance as depth or mystery. You stop calling their emotional distance independence. You stop interpreting their silence as calmness. Instead, you begin to see these behaviors for what they are: coping mechanisms born from fear, not reflections of emotional strength. As you step out of the projection, you reclaim your emotional reality. You start understanding your own needs without filtering them through the fear of pushing them away. You begin recognizing how much of yourself you minimized just to maintain the connection. You notice how many times you silenced your intuition, softened your boundaries, or justified their detachment. The moment you stop chasing, the illusion breaks, and what remains is the truth of the dynamic. This truth brings both clarity and liberation, because you are no longer dancing around someone else's emotional shadows. You return to yourself, and in doing so, you step out of the unconscious role that kept you emotionally trapped. For the avoidant, your withdrawal causes their projections to lose power. They can no longer place their fears on you when you're no longer engaging in the pattern. Projection requires movement, emotional exchange, and interaction. When that stops, the avoidant is forced to face their fears internally instead of externalizing them onto you. They begin to realize that the overwhelming feelings they once blamed on your closeness are actually coming from within themselves. This realization can be unsettling because it exposes the root of their avoidance, the fear of their own emotional depth. Without your pursuit, they must confront that the discomfort they feel is not caused by someone else asking for too much, but by their own inability to tolerate intimacy. This shift also exposes the reality that your connection was built on a psychological imbalance. You carried the emotional responsibility while they carried the emotional fear. You reached, they retreated. You understood, they avoided. When you step out of this balance, the entire system collapses. The avoidant can no longer hide behind distance because distance is no longer protecting them from anything external. Instead, it isolates them from the very connection they subconsciously desired but never knew how to sustain. Your withdrawal forces them to see that their strategy didn't prevent pain, it created it. They see how avoidance doesn't preserve freedom, it prevents closeness. Stepping out of projection is the moment the dynamic loses its illusion. You stop seeing them through your longing, and they stop seeing you through their fear. The bond, once distorted by unconscious wounds, stands in its true form, and in that clarity, both people are finally able to see themselves and each other without the shadows that once controlled the relationship. When you stop chasing an avoidant, something happens inside them that even they cannot fully explain. Although avoidants appear distant, unbothered, and self-contained, they carry a deep, unspoken longing for connection. It is not that they dislike closeness, it is that closeness feels dangerous because it exposes needs they learned to suppress long ago. When you were chasing them, they felt overwhelmed, not because your love was too much, but because it awakened emotions they did not know how to hold. Your pursuit made them feel pressured, watched, or expected to respond in a way they were not emotionally practiced to do. But when you step back, when you begin to reclaim your energy and no longer ask them to meet you in intimacy, something inside them shifts. They begin to feel a subtle softening, a quiet pull toward the very connection they once ran from. This shift happens because the emotional pressure they perceived is now gone. Avoidants are highly sensitive to expectations, even when unspoken. Your desire for closeness, your attempts to fix things, your longing to communicate, all of that created a kind of intensity that triggered their internal alarms. But when you stop chasing, those alarms quiet down. The absence of pressure creates emotional space, and in that space, their fear slowly begins to loosen. They no longer feel cornered or overwhelmed. Instead, they feel a sense of calm that allows their natural desire for connection to rise to the surface. This desire has always existed, but the noise of fear drowned it out. Your stepping back reduces that noise, giving their hidden longing room to breathe. In the silence you create, the avoidant begins to feel something unfamiliar. Curiosity. They start wondering about you in ways they didn't before. They wonder where your energy went, why the dynamic feels different, and why they suddenly notice the space between you. This curiosity is a sign that their emotional defenses are lowering. When you were chasing, they felt they could predict the pattern. Now, the pattern has changed, and they must confront their internal reactions without relying on distance as their shield. This is the moment when their longing quietly wakes up, because without the pressure of being pursued, they are finally able to feel their own desires without fear of being consumed by them. Your distance also invites them to reflect on what they once dismissed. They begin to notice the absence of your warmth, your consistency, your understanding. For the first time, they may see that these things were not burdens, but offerings they did not know how to receive. Avoidants often mistake emotional availability for control, but when you step back, they realize your presence was not trapping them. It was supporting them. They begin to feel the loss of what they once took for granted. This awareness stirs a longing inside them, a desire to reach out not because they feel obligated, but because they genuinely miss the emotional connection. What awakens inside an avoidant is not sudden intimacy, but gradual recognition. They start to see you not as someone who demanded too much, but as someone who created safety, stability, and emotional depth. They may not articulate this recognition, but they feel it in moments of stillness, in late-night thoughts, in the quiet ache that appears when they realize the connection is no longer being carried by your effort alone. And with this recognition comes a subtle fear, not of you, but of losing something meaningful without ever having explored it. This fear is not the same fear that once made them withdraw. It is a new kind of fear, one that arises when longing becomes stronger than avoidance. Your detachment allows the avoidant to approach on their own terms, and ironically, this is the only way many avoidants can move toward intimacy. They need to believe the emotional space is safe before they step into it. Your stopping becomes the first moment they feel that safety. They are not being asked to perform, fix, or respond immediately. They are not being chased. They are not being pressured. Instead, they are given room to feel, to think, to choose. And for an avoidant, choice is essential. They cannot be pulled. They must arrive. As their longing awakens, they may begin to invest small gestures that seem almost accidental at first, but they are not. An avoidant will rarely make loud declarations or dramatic movements. Instead, they test the waters with subtle steps because vulnerability still feels unfamiliar. They might check in more often than before, sending messages not because something urgent happened, but because they suddenly want to feel your presence again. They may ask how you are in a way that feels slightly deeper than usual, as if they are gently reaching toward the emotional world they once avoided. They may bring up conversations that hint at intimacy, not fully opening the door, but cracking it just enough to see if you are still there, still warm, still willing to meet them in a space that no longer feels threatening. These gestures are quiet signals of their internal shift. They are signs that the emotional pressure they once felt has softened. They are noticing the silence you created, and instead of running from it, they feel drawn toward it. They are starting to sense that closeness might not swallow them the way their old fears suggested. They begin realizing that connection does not have to cost them their independence, that affection does not mean losing control, that intimacy does not equal danger. What they feel rising inside them is not just desire, it is relief. a kind of calm curiosity that replaces the panic that once ruled their reactions. This awakening is not because you chased them, convinced them, or worked harder to prove your worth. It is because you stopped. It is because the energy that once overwhelmed them has now settled. Your quiet withdrawal became the one thing that created enough emotional space for them to breathe, think, and feel. For the first time, they can sense their own longing without fear interfering. Your absence quieted the alarms inside them, and in that quiet, their desire found room to emerge. What truly happens is simple, yet profound. When your energy stops moving toward them, their fear stops moving against you. And when fear is silent, longing can finally speak. Their longing, once awakened, becomes the first real doorway to connection for someone who has spent years running from closeness. It is not a dramatic transformation. It is a slow unfolding, a softening of the edges, a quiet recognition that they want something they spent a lifetime believing was unsafe. This longing carries them toward a new emotional awareness, one they did not have access to while they were being chased. It is not love in the thunderous way movies portray it. It is love in its first breath, hesitant but real, fragile but honest. A desire born not from pressure, but from freedom. And while their internal world shifts, your world transforms in a way just as meaningful. When you stop chasing an avoidant, the change is not only between you and them, it is also within you. You begin discovering your own depth, the part of you that was buried under the constant effort to bridge the emotional gap. You rediscover your own value, not as someone trying to earn love, but as someone who deserves it without chasing. You feel your emotional gravity returning, the quiet power of knowing who you are when you are not bending yourself to fit someone else's fear. You realize that love is not supposed to feel like begging for scraps of closeness or waiting for someone to choose you whenever their anxiety calms. You understand that love built on imbalance is not love, it is survival. You see clearly that real connection cannot be created by one heart doing the work of two, and that carrying the relationship alone does not make you loyal, it makes you lost. As your energy shifts inward, you reclaim your dignity, you strengthen your boundaries, you hear your intuition again, you remember your worth. You step out of the shadow of someone else's fear and step back into the light of your own truth. You stop shrinking yourself to make space for someone else's emotional avoidance. You stop measuring your value by their responses. You stop abandoning yourself in the name of holding the relationship together. You begin to feel whole again, not because they returned, but because you returned to yourself. And in this return, everything changes. The dynamic is no longer defined by fear. The bond is no longer controlled by pursuit. The story is no longer written by insecurity. When you stop chasing, you do not just free them, you free yourself. You reclaim your heart, your peace, your strength. You learn that stepping back is not losing love, it is choosing yourself. And it is in choosing yourself that you create the possibility for a connection that is mutual, balanced, and true. The avoidant, meanwhile, finds themselves facing a reality they had long avoided. Without your pursuit, they can no longer hide from the emptiness within themselves. The silence forces them to look inward, to confront the walls they built, and to recognize the connection they took for granted. Some avoidants will retreat deeper into their pattern, but others, often the ones who felt something real, will begin their own journey toward growth. They may not express it in words, but the shift within them is unmistakable. For the first time, they feel what it means to lose something, not because it left too quickly, but because they pushed it away too slowly. But the greatest shift happens inside you. You learn that your worth is not measured by how hard you chase love, but by how confidently you allow love to meet you. You understand that emotional safety is not created through effort, but through reciprocity. You discover that walking away from a pattern that hurts you is not a failure. It is a form of self-love. You become the person who no longer abandons themselves to keep someone else comfortable. And in that moment, everything changes. The dynamic ends, the illusion dissolves, and you step into a new chapter. One where you are no longer defined by the wounds of the past, but by the strength you found when you stopped chasing someone who wasn't ready to be caught.